Coming to you from Southern California, this is Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show,
Ken Dodge speaking.
Professor Dodge, James Curtis with Mindset.
Hi, how are you?
I have a conversation with Duke University professor Kenneth Dodge. That was him on the phone who answered and took my call and gave me a fabulous interview that you will not want to miss. I'll be talking to Professor Dodge about a program that was decades in the making and could very well prevent a number of social justice ills, including the prevention of sexual assaults among future generations of college students. But first, this news from our newly minted online newspaper, The Mindset Report. The Mindset Report, available online at mindsetreport.com. The Mindset Report, your most comprehensive online source for mental health news. Today's Mindset Report is underwritten by Responsibility, a complete guide to bystander intervention by Alan Berkowitz, who is committed to the idea that the solution to health and social justice problems requires that we engage as bystanders. From The Guardian, over-the-counter sleeping aids and hay fever treatments can increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease, according to a new study published in the journal JAMA International Medicine. A study found the sleeping medication Nitol and anti-allergy pills Benadryl and Piriton all belong to a class of drugs highlighted in a warning from researchers. That class of drugs is called anticholinergics. Previous research has raised concern about the use of anticholinergic drugs and mental impairment in the elderly, but the new study is the first to show a dose response linking greater use of the medicines with an increased risk of dementia. From National Public Radio, while you can track your health with all this new wearable data and electronic devices that are on the market, the question still remains, can your doctor use the information? Dr. Michael Bloom, a cardiologist at the University of California, San Francisco, is quoted in the NPR article as saying he gets pitches from entrepreneurs regularly, and they seem to have the same perspective. You old doctors have kept things the same as they are for 50 years, and Dr. Blum's response is, although we can't make the leap that just because the data is coming in digitally, that it's accurate. And lastly, from Time Magazine, online at time.com, if you like watching the Super Bowl, not only for the game, but for what are usually some very, very cool and innovative commercials, in addition to the Patriots versus Seahawks, Sprint versus Mobil, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, and Toyota versus Nissan, there's a new domestic violence public service announcement set to air during the big game. The ad is part of the NFL's No More campaign, but you won't see football players this time around. This ad is based on an actual 911 call from a domestic violence victim who pretends she's ordering pizza because her attacker is still in the room. For more on these and other mental health stories, visit the Mindset Report at mindsetreport.com. We're back with our main story, social and emotional IQ in elementary schools, with my guest, Professor Duke, with my guest from Duke University, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to Mindset Mental Health News and Information. I'm your host, James Curtis. You can find us on the web at mindsetshow.com, on Facebook at Mindset Show page, or on Twitter with the handle at Mindset Show. My guest today, Duke University professor Kenneth Dodge. Kenneth Dodge and a number of his colleagues from different institutions have come up with a rather phenomenal, remarkable program. I first heard about this story on National Public Radio. They talked about a program called PATHS, P as in Paul, A-T-H-S, PATHS. And the program PATHS is part of an overall larger program that not only helps elementary school kids recognize and express their emotions, they learn very, very simple, straightforward, but very fundamental and profound lessons through a 15 to 20 minute theme-based storytelling and interaction with one another in the classroom. One of the stories is based on a character named Twiggle. You'll hear a little bit more about him during my interview with Professor Dodge during this program, during this my interview today. The idea that the fundamental change that can occur in individuals starting at a very young age is simply, to me, incredibly profound. It's an idea that has been a long time coming. It's based in some research that dates back to the 80s. And my interview with Professor Dodge is something that was nothing less than phenomenal. Here's Professor Dodge. Let's start with the overview. The PATHS program is part of a larger program called Fast Track. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So
that's right. Fast Track is the larger program that consists of several components, including a classroom curriculum, which is called PATHS, but it also includes individual work with children, a parent training program, a children's social skills development program, etc. And we bundle those together coherently, so they all fit together, called Fast Track.
About the research, this research it goes back to the 80s. That these programs are based on.
That's right. The research goes back to the 1980s, and if you recall, the 1980s were a time when juvenile violence was growing in the United States at an alarming rate. Researchers were studying how some children come to become aggressive and chronically violent as they grow up. We learned a number of things, we being researchers. We learned that we could identify not with 100% accuracy, but pretty good accuracy, which children are likely to become seriously violent when they're adolescents and adults, as early as when they're 5 years of age. We could identify children who have begun a trajectory of growing behavior problems in school, growing aggressive behavior problems, growing violence and delinquency in the community, and then adult criminality. We also learned that these children cost society a great deal. They cost in human terms in the unfulfilled lives for themselves, but also in the pain and suffering of their family members and the pain that they inflict on others in the human cost. But they also cost society in dollars, as much as over $2 million each chronically aggressive, violent child, in the form of costs of incarceration, costs to their victims, cost for the mental health and behavioral health and educational kinds of interventions and treatments that we have been applying. So researchers, myself included, came to the idea that if we could identify which children are on that trajectory and how much they're ultimately going to cost, that maybe we could identify how they become aggressive and then develop interventions to prevent that trajectory from developing. And that's how Fast Track emerged.
Fast Track is a collaborative between a number of institutions, yours included. How did you get everybody to sort of chip in, pitch in, and tackle this immense issue?
Yeah, there was a team of psychologists, developmental and clinical psychologists that knew each other and were interacting in the late 1980s. We were catalyzed by the National Institute of Mental Health in 1990, when the National Institute of Mental Health declared chronic conduct disorder and violence a high priority, and issued a call to the research community to propose ways of addressing this problem, and they offered some initial federal funding for this kind of research. So I, along with my colleagues, got together and suddenly we developed a team, and each of the team members provided unique expertise, which made the team so much more powerful.
Fast Track addresses, according to the article that I'm looking at online, and that website is fasttrackproject.org. In the overview, it identifies Washington University, Vanderbilt University, Duke University, and Penn State. Your university, your institution, of course, being Duke University. 10,000 children were part of what's referred to in this document as the multi-stage screening. Out of those 10,000 children, how many kids participated in the program?
We initially piloted the program and developed it over several years, and then we were ready to submit it to as rigorous empirical test as we could. So for that rigorous empirical test, we screened close to 10,000 kindergarten children in these 4 communities. These children attended kindergarten in high-risk schools and neighborhoods. High risk meaning that there was a high rate of children who were growing up and likely to become delinquent or violent. We screened all of the children in kindergarten in those 55 different schools in those communities. We identified the 891 who were at highest risk for growing up to become chronically violent. Our screening tool involved a series of questions that we asked the kindergarten teacher for each child, and we asked the parent of each child. The questions had to do with children's aggressive behavior, disobedience, conduct problems, difficulty getting along with other children, those kinds of behaviors. We identified these 891 children, and then through flip of a coin by schools, we randomly assigned half of them, 445, to be targeted to receive the Fast Track intervention. The other half we followed, we did not intervene with, but we followed as the randomly assigned control group. So we ended up targeting our intervention at the 445 high-risk children, kindergarten children who are assigned to the intervention group. At the same time, we knew that these children attended kindergarten classrooms and schools where they were interacting with other children, and so we needed to direct our intervention toward the peer group as well. In order to have an impact on these high-risk children, we also needed to direct our intervention toward the teachers of these children, and the mothers and the fathers, and the family members. So many more than 445 children were involved in the intervention. It may be close to 10,000 children who received some form of the intervention at all, even if it was simply being a peer of a child who was targeted. And the peer intervention came in several forms, one of them being a classroom curriculum called PATHS, that was directed toward teaching all the children in the classroom social-emotional skills, skills of getting along with each other, skills of resolving conflicts non-aggressively and competently.
And that gets to one of the very cool parts of the program, Twiggle, the turtle, and his exploits. Yes. I'm assuming Twiggle is a boy. Did I get that right, or was that an assumption? A wrong assumption?
Probably not gender specific, okay. But most likely.
Who came up with Twiggle? Are you a writer as well? I mean, you're a talented guy, you're a neuroscientist, you're a psychologist. How did you come up with the story part of this, which seems to be a key component?
Yeah, different parts of the intervention involve taking the best of what we knew from developmental psychology and theory and empirical findings, and then applying it in ways that children could identify with or relate to, or we could translate that knowledge into effective interventions. So one part of the intervention is a classroom curriculum and a series of ways of helping children learn different kinds of social and emotional skills. So one member of our team, Mark Greenberg, was the leader of that component, and he and some of his students and colleagues developed different components of the PATHS curriculum, including Twiggle.
Now, 35 million public elementary school pupils in this country. According to a 2014 estimate, your study dealt with about 900 of them, and you expand that out to the peer group and the parents and the teachers. You're impacting a lot of folks, but still, it's a relatively small percentage, as is the nature of a pilot program. Have you looked at the arc of upscaling this type of project throughout the country? And I'm aware that there are projects that are similar to yours, one out of Yale called Ruler, one in Chicago, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Can it go nationwide?
It can go nationwide. So we have disseminated the Fast Track program in a similar manner to which we developed it in other communities in the United States, but we don't have any pretense that Fast Track per se would be the only program where we'd have a monopoly or it would be the only program that gets disseminated. Instead, what we see is different parts of the Fast Track program being disseminated, or programs that have similar kinds of activities, or perhaps even better kinds of intervention activities than we have, but are based in the same concepts being developed across the country. One component is the PATHS classroom curriculum, which is being implemented now in hundreds of schools with thousands of children every year, and we could well imagine that component growing pretty rapidly across the country. Another part of the program are parent skills training and parent support groups for children with conduct problems. And we can see those kinds of groups developing that schools might sponsor. They might be in healthcare delivery systems. They might be in mental health systems. They might be in churches. They might be in community programs. Other features of the program include an academic tutoring program, which of course is very important and being disseminated nationwide. Another part is individual kinds of mentoring and approaches with children. So we do believe that the movement of social emotional learning and support for children is very important and is growing in this country and should grow in this country.
One of the things that, and I want to circle back to identifying the kids who are the little kids, the kindergartners who might be at risk, that general idea to someone in my position who is not a trained mental health professional or in the educational field for that matter, but just looking at it from the outside, more like a parent, I suppose, is kind of, I don't know, daunting or scary, or it just seems a little unsettling, I guess maybe is the right word, that you can look at a kid at 5 years old and make an assessment that they're going to have problems later on in life. Have you run into any sort of pushback about the idea that you're labeling these kids at this early stage?
Yeah, labeling is certainly something we don't want to do, something that a child should not suffer. And we don't mean that this is destiny or that cannot be changed. In fact, the whole point of the research study of Fast Track is the opposite, that these children who might initially seem like they're on a trajectory toward developing problems, we can interrupt that. We can stop that and put them on a new trajectory. The way we think about the whole social, emotional, behavioral, aggressive, violent and social competence realm is in terms of skills that can be developed. I liken it to the idea of literacy. So in reading literacy, we have this belief in our country that all children can become literate if we provide kindergarten through 12th grade reading instruction, and we support that with parenting and community efforts and a lot of cultural supports for becoming literate. But if a child is in kindergarten and is not yet aware of phonics or different sounds, we would identify that child as in need of additional support. That doesn't mean that child's destined to be illiterate throughout her or his life. It means that this child might need a little extra kind of support. That's the way we see the social competence, that all children should become socially literate. All children can become socially literate through classroom curricula, education, parenting support, community support, all of those kinds of efforts. But along the way, some children might need additional kinds of education support, training, intervention. Those are the children who are identified for Fast Track. They were the ones who we thought at that time needed additional intervention. It does not mean they were predestined or that there's somehow some kind of biological or some kind of process that makes them not able. In fact, the opposite. We thought that they were headed on a trajectory that wasn't looking like it was going in the right direction, but we could change that direction. And we did.
If a parent or a teacher or anyone who might be interested hears this story, hears either this show or the NPR story or any of the numerous other forums where you've talked about Fast Track and paths, is there something that an individual or a group might do to say, hey, I want this in my community?
I think they can urge the school teachers and principals and school system leaders. They can urge elected officials, public program leaders about the importance of social competence in children, about the importance of being able to get along, being able to exert self-control, self-regulation, social problem-solving, social skills. All of these skills, some economists have called these skills the non-cognitive skills or the soft skills, the social-emotional skills, social competencies. I would suggest that if parents or members of a community see that as important, they would urge leaders in the community to get on board and to do something about it. Not to do anything willy-nilly, but just like in other areas of health, medicine, science, we have programs that don't work, and we fortunately have programs that we have found through rigorous evaluation that do work, and I would call Fast Track and paths among them.
Do you see the spread of this idea, which, again, I think is just absolutely amazing and incredible, and I applaud you and everybody else who's a part of the development of this methodology, as best being spread through a bottom-up sort of approach, that is, individuals, teachers, parents saying, hey, I want this in my school, or is there a role for, say, a governmental intervention?
I think we need to come at it from many different directions. An individual parent who is concerned about her 5-year-old child should be encouraged that there may be ways to have a positive impact. So I support and encourage those individual parents and family members and neighbors. I encourage people who are in the professions, our doctors and nurses and ministers and classroom teachers, social service workers, to pay greater attention to social emotional learning and children's social development, and be encouraged by the research, by the science, that we can do something about it. Scientists, researchers such as myself, we are trying and should do even more to develop better programs and better evaluations and better research. Our elected officials and our professional public policy makers and leaders should attend to this in the way they think about funding and investments in children. There's plenty of research that would support public policy makers financial investments in these programs in children. That is, these kinds of social-emotional learning programs have a very good chance of being cost-beneficial for our society. It's the kind of issue that could find people from all these different vantage points rallying around.
Who's beating the drum loudest for these types of programs right now? Is the onus of spreading this information on folks like yourself, the researchers, or is there some contingent of folks out there saying, hey, everybody should do this, let's spread the word, let's get this information about this type of program out to as many people as we can?
I'm not sure there's a single leader, but I certainly hear the rallying cry from several different sectors. There are some scientists who are leading this cause. I applaud the economist at the University of Chicago, Jim Heckman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics and has used the platform that a Nobel Prize gives him to sound the call of the importance of early investments in children's early education and development of these social competencies. I see some public officials being very interested in children's development, and I think both Democrat and Republican officials these days have a reason to come together around this cause. That is, Democrats traditionally have wanted more programs for children, but perhaps have not paid enough attention to programs that work versus not work, and have been viewed by Republicans as simply throwing dollars at the problem without thinking about it. Republicans, on the other hand, want to use the dollars wisely and have been seen by Democrats as simply wanting to take dollars away. Maybe the two groups can get together around a common cause of investing in children in ways that do work. And that's where the importance of science comes in and rigorous evaluation. And thank goodness we now have some programs that do work and are cost beneficial.
One term that you used a few moments back, chronic conduct disorder. Is that an identifiable disorder as we think of a personality disorder?
There are different terms applied from different professions. So the psychiatric profession uses the term conduct disorder, which in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is a disorder. I'm not sure it makes best sense to think about this problem solely from a psychiatric or a psychopathological perspective. I don't think that's quite right, but that's the term they use. In education, these are children who are at risk for moving into special education and being behavioral disorder kids or kids in special education for behavior problems. I don't think we should concern ourselves with the label, but I think we should realize that there are children who are growing up and moving on a trajectory and in a direction that many of us, if we take a close look, are realizing that this is not the direction we want our children to move as they grow up.
There's a quote in the National Public Radio story about a young man, Tommy DeJesus. The reporter tells a story and has a quote from Tommy talking about him using these lessons that he learned from the Twiggle stories in one of his interactions with his peers, where he says, the quote reads, "They were making fun of his shoes and how he was dressed. I said, just because you have shoes and he doesn't, that doesn't give you the right to bully him." And apparently the kids that he was talking to were receptive. That reminds me of the movement and paradigm shift that is currently being promoted about bystander intervention and that paradigm as it relates to situations like sexual assaults on college campuses and the like. Is that a reasonable connection as these kids grow older and go out into the world, that they're going to be able to be more helpful and more preventative?
It is a reasonable connection. Aggressive conflicts have many different components. Perhaps there's a bully, perhaps there's a victim, perhaps there's two children who are angry at each other and getting involved in a conflict, but that occurs in a broader context of other children, brothers, sisters, peers, classroom peers, adults, teachers, bystanders, neighbors, and in order to help our children develop social competence, we need support from all of those different sectors, and we need to help our children become the helpers of other children by learning how to intervene and not simply watch and be bystanders. So that concept can apply to conflicts on the playground in first grade classrooms, but as kids get older, it can also apply to watching someone vandalize a building, or watching someone get involved in drinking drug use, or watching others get involved in rape or sexual assault, or discrimination toward vulnerable groups. We can all be a part of this. I think it is part of a growing movement of recognition, the importance of our social relationships and what we can do as individuals and as partners and bystanders to do something about that.
Professor Kenneth Dodge, Duke University, Director of the Center for Child and Family Policy, and a whole bunch of other really cool stuff. You're amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Again, that was my guest, Kenneth Dodge of Duke University, and what an incredible program. I disagree, as incredible as that may sound, with just one little itty bitty thing. Not really disagree, really, but the idea that this program and the peer-based, peer-reviewed studies that it's based on, that shows that this type of approach actually works, should simply be, as I was talking to a listener during the interview, it should simply be mandatory. It should be as fundamentally required as the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. You can find links to all of the information on today's show on the Mindset Show Facebook page, facebook.com/Mindset Show page, and on our newly designed MindsetShow.com website. And as always, we tweet with the handle @Mindset Show. Next week on Mindset, the new approach that is fast becoming a worldwide movement: bystander intervention. My guest will be Dr. Alan Berkowitz. For Mindset, mental health news and information, I'm your host, James Curtis. Dare to see mental health differently and pass it on.